Well, I was a little bit worried that one of those old Star Wars satellites that have been rolling around since the Cold War era had been commandeered by the SIS or something, and someone had been
You thought I was taken out, Glenn.
Yeah, taken out.
Sucked up some sort of awful beam, and spat out in digital bits somewhere out there in the Pacific.
Exactly. No, Salman Manning from livenews.co.nz is back. Talk about the week in politics. Let's just go back to the leak of the Teapot tapes onto the internet yesterday, taking everyone by surprise.
Yes, and we were just talking about the public interest aspects around that and why it's, in my view, in my opinion, it's important. Just look at some of the work. If people are online, they get the chance to go online to look up Stephen Price. He's a legal expert on media things, and he gives a very good case of why it should be out there and why he believes, as a lawyer, from a legal point of view, it is not illegal to actually put that stuff out there. But basically, even if people get to hear that and they think, well, there's nothing really in it, well, that, in a sense, is in the public interest. The two politicians were speaking during an election campaign. They were certainly speaking at a time where people were considering who to vote for. It's important, really, to understand our elected leaders and our elected politicians on what was going through their heads and their strategic kind of manoeuvrings at that time. But that said, I understand, Glenn, that there's a caution really about us talking too much in depth about exactly what's in those tapes, and perhaps we'll leave that for a time to settle.
Well, I guess we can go on to the Prime Minister's reaction, because the fact that the police complaint is still there, and that's the reason why we can't play the tapes nor talk about the content of them, but he is refusing at this stage to remove his complaint, and that's of course got Winston Peters still snapping at his heels.
Yeah, exactly. Winston Peters, you've got to remember that he was on 3 News citing what was in the transcript of these tapes during the election campaign. He cited reasons obviously similar to what I was just talking about just earlier, public interest aspects. But Winston Peters, in some ways, is probably in the same situation as, like myself and others who have provided access to these tapes, and Scoop, for example, in the sense that we believe it's legal and it's proper to actually have this kind of material out there. Winston Peters, of course, is using it for a political angle too, to basically criticise the Prime Minister for what he believes, appears to believe anyway, is an overreaction on John Key's behalf during that period of the campaign where the police were called and a police complaint was made that this tape was in the first instance recorded. So that's an interesting one. Winston Peters, I think, has got a very strong point, and as an elected politician, he's outside of Parliament. While he is in a privileged position to be able to get a good debate on this, he is not doing it from an inside Parliament type of situation where he would acquire a certain degree of privilege. So, you've got to say the guy's got a bit of courage in that way. So
while Twitter yesterday was going crazy about the release of the tapes, dotted throughout those tweets was tweets from the AUT University official Twitter account giving an account of John Key's State of the Nation speech. So all this was happening at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. It's what a day for John Key. Sometimes, you kind of got to love this guy, this politician. He kind of, even if he doesn't plan it, he can turn up a certain controversy and a certain clumsiness that, it just brings a smile to everybody's faces. But underneath his very serious speech, of which later on, he apologised for one aspect, which is out in the public domain and on most areas, where he apologised for making reference to older people in respect to New Zealand First traditional vote. But in amongst that speech, what John Key was doing was he was laying out really what the national-led government is planning to do. So the real nitty-gritty, if you like, comes down to, 4 bullet points that John Key rested his speech on, and it was responsibility for managing the government's finances, We're going to see more of that. They're very broad rhetorical kind of positions, but building a more competitive and productive economy, delivering better public services, and rebuilding Christchurch. So those are the commitments that we can expect to see just about everything that the government positions on to be framed through those 4 points. We look at, for example, the public service. We've seen a lot of that already. You know, the government, the national-led government, was elected back in 2008, arguably on the back of getting stuck into the bureaucrats. Now, what we can see is over the last 3 years, it has peeled away a lot of the people inside the public service, and we can expect to see more of that. What it's done, for those who aren't too sure on what the public service does, the government and its ministers have advisors from the public service. Those advisors are supposed to be independent. They go into the beehive, they have a meeting, and they say, look, this is the way it's going. We're running this ministry or department on your behalf. These are the strong points, these are the weak points on your policies, or et cetera, or where you're thinking of going, and give independent advice. What the government is doing has been chewing away at the not just those kind of people, but the research and the analysis people, and behind that wave of people that they meet with, and it has been in some areas replacing them with appointees. National Party appointees, not necessarily National Party members, but appointees, to give them that so-called independent advice. So there's a lot of that going on. We can see that there's going to be cuts through the public service at the front with the actual public itself. So we can, people going into wins and things like that, you could expect to see, and Housing New Zealand, you could expect to see fewer people on the ground in that area too. Yeah,
but also with the economic outlook, he's pared back the expectations for a surplus based on the continuing downgrades of the euro and what's been going on there. But it was only, the election was in November, right? And he was still saying in November, just before the election, and I guess it's all part of smoke and mirrors and getting votes, that we're going to get this surplus. But it didn't take a brain surgeon back in November to know that we would still, no matter what, probably be in the situation we are in right now with the Eurozone. It was always going to be heading down, and no matter what David Cameron says, no matter what Merkel says, it's all going to collapse. I mean, this is a given. Most economists will probably, behind closed doors say, yeah, no, this is actually, we're in dire straits. So really, John Key knew this as well.
He did. I mean, you're right. It's not rocket science. It is complex. But you and I debated on this very program last year at different points that the Prime Minister was painting too positive a line on all of this global economy stuff and the consequential wash on New Zealand in that way. Treasury's projections, as soon as they came out, were being criticised from all courts. And our argument, I guess, on your program here, Glenn, on the state of it on Kiwi, was that, the finance minister was giving caution and conditional kind of outcomes based on the global economy, and certainly most specifically that in the Northern Hemisphere, and how that may affect China. And we were kind of flagging that up. So yes, the Prime Minister, up until the election campaign, was certainly trying to paint as positive a line as possible. He's still kind of saying, and I think he's probably right in this respect, that New Zealand is well positioned and better positioned than many around the globe that are in the OECD and the positions where we are in the OECD pecking orders. But at the same time, there are consequences to all of this. We are heavily indebted. We talked all last year about the levels of debt that New Zealand was digging in under the national-led government. They were very concerning. Bernard Hickey's independent work on interest.co.nz is fantastic groundwork, and also steering, his analysis steers basically political exposure of these types of things as well. Very well read and very well experienced guy in that respect. Now, his concerns were always that the levels of debt that New Zealand was advancing into would come back to bite us. The point being, when the Northern Hemisphere's economies are struggling, when the cost of money up there, to borrow money up there, goes up, our interest rates of what we are borrowing in those big amounts of money go up too, and that's where it impacts on the New Zealand economy and the front end. The second layer of that would be with our trading partners, and if they cannot afford the premium kind of product and service that New Zealand exports, well, then we're going to see a detrimental kind of effect washing in on New Zealand in those ways. So it's an important speech on a fascinating day yesterday that occurred in New Zealand politics, but it's certainly one we we needed to mark, I think, Glenn.
And this is for this week's State of It with Selwyn Manning at livenews.co.nz. Cheers, Selwyn.
See you later. Bye.